gave him such an authority and clout, apart from many other personal qualities and achievements that he had had, that it has drawn the attention of world human rights community and world public opinion, which has protected him in the worst years of his life, and ultimately served to, I am convinced, created the momentum that led to his release. And I very much hope that it will also work for Sentsov, even though the situation now is different, and it's quite possible that Russian authorities are more impervious to the pressure of the world public opinion, especially these days. But I think it is valuable, and it will definitely serve the purpose of release of Sentsov. I hope it's not overly optimistic, and it does sound possibly very rosy and possibly unrealistic too. But I certainly would welcome the release of Sentsov, as well as other Ukrainian prisoners in Russia, whom, even though they may not be considered political prisoners in the same sense as the prisoners of conscience in the Soviet times, I think they are held arbitrarily. They are held against the main tenets of the Russian constitution, and it is an affront to humanity, an affront to international law. I am not an expert or a scholar of Ukrainian domestic policy and current events. And the same goes for the acting president, Petro Poroshenko. So I'm really not able to pass a judgment on the outcomes. But I think that, in my mind, Ukraine needs to shape its agenda, its position in regards to the behavior of Russian. And I do not think that that position is clear-cut, possibly even to the main actors of Ukraine political sphere. And of course, there are aspects that make it particularly difficult. The fact that there is no declaration of war on either side, and the Ukraine that has been weakened for decades by Russia's interference in their internal affairs, is obviously unable to declare war on Russia, because I think the main reason for that is that Ukraine cares more for human lives than Russia. Human life is not a commodity in Russia of today. It is dispensable. It is of no value, and I think that is the reason also for the most cruel, inhuman, and violating every possible international norm of behavior, the way Russia treats its prisoners in general, and the way it treats Ukrainian activists. The kidnappings, the show trials, the charges are all completely arbitrary, in my opinion. And one thought that I had in this regard was that it comes from the vocabulary of psychiatry, surprisingly. There is a term of transference, And I believe that Russian authorities have this, they demonstrate this phenomenon by transferring their own faults onto the people that they want to repress or to punish. And one such person is obviously Oleg Sentsov, because the transference of the charge of terrorism, of which he was not guilty, and that was not proven by any accepted legal norms in the court or anywhere, is the one that should really go to Russian authorities and their the organs that are supposed to be law enforcement and definitely law abiding. So I think that we can contemplate the situation of kidnappings, of taking people across the border, of forcing Russian citizenship on them as something that borders on terrorism. And that is, to me, an abhorrent trait. And I see it ever since the annexation of Crimea and all other destabilizing activities that Russia engages in Ukraine. I'm happy to say that there is more and more young people in Sakharov Center. They have been attracted over the programs by the programs over the last probably 10 years already, and that is a very hopeful sign. But mostly at the events before that tendency started, you would see people, the so-called шестидесятники, the people of the 60s, the people who were close to human rights movement, people who had friends in the human rights and dissident movement. And it was a rather sad sight. But I only go for events that have to do with either my stepfather, Andrei Sakharov, or with my mother, Elena Bonner, because it's not easy to travel more often. So my perception may not be indicative of the type of milieu that Sakharov Center attracts. For example, I have never been to any of the Sakharovskaya Mayovka, which is a Sakharov May Day, let's call it that way, because Sakharov was born in May of 2021. Usually Sakharov Center has a huge event around that date, which attracts all sorts of people. And so I'm hoping to be able to go this year. So maybe I will experience firsthand at that time. Sakharov Center is embattled as any human rights organization, independent human rights organization in Russia right now. And we are keeping our fingers crossed and trying to raise the public awareness to and support. I don't mean even monetary support, but support that would make it difficult for the Sakharov. That would make it difficult for the Russian authorities to close down the center in the foreseeable future, especially given the fact that in 2021, this would be the year of Sakharov's centenary. And hopefully the authorities will try to avoid the scandal or the shame that would be associated if the Sakharov Center were to be taken away from the Sakharov Commission, which is official title is the Public Commission for the Preservation of the Legacy of academician Andrei Sakharov. Now, I'd like to, so there are various provocations, ugly scenes at exhibitions that are obviously staged by ultra-right and xenophobic Russian associations or movements that exist in Russia today. And these provocations, fortunately, so far have not been very destructive, but you never know. And so the existence of Sakharov Center is precarious, to say the least. And I know that such is the existence of many other well-known and lesser-known human rights independent organizations. And of course, there is this infamous list of foreign agents on which both these organizations were put, and many others as well. And it is very difficult to continue, but they do continue, and they show the courage and the perseverance, which I admire. And from that note, I want to go back to Sentsov, because I really followed his case with great interest and sympathy. And I do admire his courage and perseverance, and I wish him the best. I think the Sakharov Award, which had mixed history and mixed reviews in the past, did from time to time, in my opinion and my mother's while she was living, make good choices, and this is definitely one of those good choices. And I want to say that a man who's younger than my children, I have such respect for him and almost envy as a mother, and I wish his family all the very best, and I hope that at least the award will ease their financial hardship, the hardship that his mother endures caring for their two children. And it is a unique case in the history of Slavic countries, or certainly in the Soviet Union. You would have rarely met a single father. It was usually a single mother that would care for the children. It is very unfortunate, and I sympathize with him greatly. But I want to say a few words about the political side of this case. The fact that he was having been arrested in early spring of 2014, shortly after the annexation of Crimea, and kept incommunicado until the trial, which followed, if I remember correctly, more than a year later, is an absolutely shameful demonstration of the inability and unprofessionalism, to say nothing of the professional ethics of the Russian law enforcement institute and its institute of courts, which have obviously have become a long time ago not independent, but operating on the old Soviet premise of the so-called telephone law, when the decisions are given to the judges and to the courts by the authorities that are able to give their orders by telephone. This is a disgrace, and it is, I think, one more symptom of how inhuman and cruel Russian system has become over the last 20 years. And people like Sentsov are needed alive, not dead. Even a symbol will not be able to do that much that he would be able to do as a live human being. And I wish him all the best, and very much hope, and will definitely do whatever I can to make sure that he's released before the end of his cruel and unjustified prison term.